Hello and welcome to Living History UK, and this is the Living History UK Festival.
Mid last year, we had an idea to host our own festival, celebrating and bringing together a number of premier living history groups. Within only a few weeks, we'd secured no less than 14 living history groups and a 5-star venue in Chiltern Open Air Museum. The event also boasted a series of lectures from leading minds in the military history world, as well as securing the attendance of famous TikTokers such as Sam Mayfair, Fly UK, Ricky Vett and Laurie Alice Adventures. The event also gave our followers a perfect chance to come and meet us and talk all things history. What follows is a whistle-stop tour of each group that attended the festival.
I'm joined by Matt from the 2nd Battalion, the 95th Rifles. So Matt, what are you wearing?
So I'm wearing the kit and equipment of a rifleman of the 2nd Battalion, the 95th Rifles. He would have been seen dressed like this at battles such as Corunna, Quatre Bras and Waterloo. So starting from the top, on my head I am wearing the 1812 pattern cap, or shako as it's commonly known as. On there I have my squared peak. I also have a cap badge of a bugle horn and green cords and a green plume. Further down I have my green jacket and green trousers. This is particular to the 95th Rifles, and it was funded for by King George III, who was a Hanoverian, and he wanted them dressed in green like the Jaeger huntsmen of the forest. I also have my sword bayonet. This was also particular to the 95th, and it fitted onto the side like so it wouldn't interfere with any shots coming out. This was also came from the Hanoverian huntsmen, as the Hanoverian huntsmen used the sword to kill off their prey after shooting them. The rifle itself is the Baker rifle, as it's nicknamed, or as it should properly be known as, the 1800 pattern infantry rifle. It's a flintlock mechanism and is one of the very first rifles used by the British Army, which had rifling on the inside, which meant that the round would fly straighter and truer towards the enemy. I also have on my right hand side here my black cartridge box. This would carry 60 rounds of ammunition, which was made up of a paper cartridge, black powder and a lead ball. I also have my haversack and canteen on my left hand side. The haversack would carry my rations for 24 to 48 hours, which would have consisted of things like bread, meat or rice, as was more common in places like the peninsula. And also in the canteen should have been 2 pints of water. However, water was very dangerous at the time, so it tended to be things like beer or spirits. And then finally, on my feet, I'm wearing black gaiters. These were used to stop things from getting inside of the shoe and making the 50 to 60 miles a soldier would have to march uncomfortable.
It was great talking to Matt and to see his passion and enthusiasm for history shining through. His knowledge is a goldmine, and he has truly followed in his father's footsteps. Moving through the Napoleonic camp, there was some cracking living history and kit displays, especially this cooking display. A rifleman was also busy at hand, melting lead and moulding balls to make up cartridges, and a tabletop display of kit from a private of the 68th really helped add to the overall display. The riflemen of the 5th, 60th and 2nd 95th Rifles then marched to the arena, where they delivered a drill and firing display, bringing period drill manuals such as Dundas, de Rottenberg and Campbell to life. The smell of black powder clung to the air, and their display was rounded off by a sword charge at the crowd line. Once the Napoleonics had strutted their stuff in the arena, it was time to go and visit another group's living history display.
So the next group we're going to visit are the Rifle Brigade, who portray the Rifle Brigade during the Crimean War. I'm going to hand you over to the very capable hands of Mr. James Deering.
Okay, so here we have a rifleman from the British Rifle Brigade, 1854, as he would have been shipped out to the Crimean War. You can see he's wearing the Albert I shako. Rifleman, right, face, with the front and rear peak. He's got the 1833 British Army coatee, double-breasted, with the green rifleman trousers and the British Army standard issue ankle boot. He's got the black leather accoutrements that a rifleman would have, waist belt and ball pouch, and by this period the rifleman would load and fire his rifle from the pouch. There's a really quick, easier access, far easier than accessing the cartridge box to the rear. Rifleman, right face, which you can see here. He also has his linen haversack, which he would keep all his issued rations in for a march, and the standard British wooden canteen, which has been in use since the Napoleonic War, completely unchanged. We then have the British Army knapsack with a wooden frame and reinforced leather corners, with his issue woolen blanket greatcoat folded nicely on the back, with the mess tins within an oil cover on the top, and inside he would keep all his sleeping blanket, spare shirt, socks, cleaning accoutrements, etc. Rifleman, right about, face, shoulder, arms, port, arms. He is armed with the 1853 Enfield 3-band rifle, accurate up to 1,000 yards, which is a distinct advantage from the Baker rifle that everybody knows from the Napoleonic rifleman, which is accurate up to 350 yards. It's a massive advancement during this Crimean War. And with the lack of strategical differences in the way wars were fought, this had a significant increase in casualties that they weren't prepared for in this war.
As we leave the fabulous Rifle Brigade reenactment group, we head over to take in the firing display in the arena from the Diehards and the Surrey Rifle Volunteer Living History groups. The Victorian Association comprises of two living history groups, the Surrey Rifles and the Diehards. Both groups portray the British soldier of the late 19th century to a high standard, and on both days wowed us with a very professional display which included skill at arms, drill and firing demonstrations. Their display showed how riflemen worked ahead of the line infantry during the late Victorian period, and, much like the Napoleonic period for that matter, the riflemen worked almost exclusively in extended order. Riflemen were, unlike their line infantry counterparts, clothed in green, and were adept at providing well-aimed shots from their Martini Henry rifles. The line infantry, on the other hand, fought in the main in close order, providing well-timed volleys to deadly effect. The line infantry were also armed with a Martini Henry rifle. As the Victorians leave the arena, a very special guest makes himself known to us, and thus brings to a close nearly 3 months of research and work.
Okay folks, some of you may well remember the story of this paybook, which is named to Arthur Griffiths. Got something very special for you. Let's go and meet his great-grandson, John Griffiths. So, John, here we go, here's the paybook. We'd like to give you this from Living History UK, and also from James Skade as well, the original person who donated it to us.
Thank you. And I've brought Arthur's medals.
Oh wow.
Today.
Let's take a look inside.
I couldn't quite believe we actually managed to reunite the paybook with Arthur's descendants, and seeing his medals, I have to admit it was quite emotional, especially knowing that was the first time they'd been reunited in a very long time. Arthur's medals include the War Medal, the 1415 Star, Victory Medal, and also the Silver Wound Badge and his Cap Badge too. A huge thanks to James Skade for donating the book, and to Adam at Medals Going Home for his indefatigable assistance on the project.
So we've now moved into the World War I camp now, and I'm joined by Lawrence from the Rifles Living History Society. Now Lawrence, you've got something that's quite unique that isn't really seen on the Living History circuit, but you're going to go into more depth to what you're displaying.
Right, I will go into more depth. In 1919, the First World War is finished.
but the battlefields are still full up with ordnance and dead bodies. So the work of the British Army did not stop until 1921. So up until 1921, the British Army will have to go all over the battlefields and move all the ammunition. Then they will start to find all the dead bodies on the battlefields, and then after they find them, they are then moved into the cemeteries. When they get to the cemeteries, as you can come over here and follow me over here, there are two large cemeteries that were started before the end of the war, one at Abbeville and the other one at Wimereux. Both cemeteries had women gardeners from the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, and as you can see, and they start in 1917 and they go through the war, and the cemeteries are not very big. By 1918, 1919, you can see how large the cemeteries have become. And if we have a look at the women that are doing this, you can see they start off in 1917, but by the end of the war, it's showing on their faces, and that was called stretcher face. They'd seen far too many burials, far too many dead bodies.
So how were they actually finding these people?
Well, they find the people, they would go across the battlefield and they'd look on the ground. You'd see more grass, obviously, over a body.
Yep.
The grass would usually go a black, bluish colour. If there's any water, it would go black.
Right.
You'd see holes where an animal had actually in the body and had come out, so there's bits of equipment, bits of bones. If they weren't quite sure, they would get a rod from a Vickers machine gun. Officer's job, officer's prerogative. He'd stick it in the ground, he'd pull it out, and he'd taste the end. Body, dig it up. Simple as that.
Wow, that's way before geophysics.
way before time taking.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks very much, Lawrence.
You're welcome.
As we leave the Rifles Living History display and journey on, we head over to another World War I group, the West Country Tommies, who are portraying a Lewis gun detachment as they would have appeared in 1916 and 1917. As the name suggests, they hail from the West Country, and under the stewardship of Darren Berry, have prospered into a premier living history group that are much respected on the circuit. During the day, their display was at times the fixed encampment, but also included a roaming display where they put into practice the doctrine of the time, deploying the gun where practicable and going through the motions of a Lewis gun detachment. One of the features of the festival, and something that we decided we wanted to include from very early in the planning stages, was a series of lectures from leading minds of the military history world. We were lucky enough to have people like Ramsay Green cover the subject of World War II rations, Pete Neal tackled the subject of the Great War Tommy, and Jake Brown covered Operation Sea Lion. Steve Davis's talk focused on a Napoleonic soldier, whilst Laurie Alice hosted a fantastic Bletchley Park inspired escape room. Down at the Arborfield Barnboast days, Dickie Bass talked about the SAS Jeep prior to the Rhine crossing. Simon Moore, aka Rifleman Moore, who was present with his group Mikko, rounded off each day with his enthralling lecture on the domino theory. And it is Mikko who we next visit on this whistle-stop tour of groups who attended the festival.
I'm joined by Ramsay Green from Mikko, and we're now in the Mikko display. So Ramsay's going to give me a whistle-stop tour of what they're displaying here at the festival.
Thanks, Pete. Right, we decided to bring along a timeline of British infantry equipment, as it happens through 1939 to 45. So starting in 1939, we see the service dress with 08 equipment, pretty much the same as soldiers wore during the Great War,
Yes, yeah.
to show, with a few modifications and changes, what guys went to war with, woefully inequipped.
Yep.
We moved to Dunkirk, so shortly after they moved over to France, they got the new battle dress introduced, and with the introduction of the Bren light machine gun, they needed to change the web equipment to handle the box magazine to keep it fed. We see the respirator still being worn on the front, as per during the Great War as well. Again, the threat of gas was quite prevalent at the time.
Yeah.
Gas capes on the back, as we all know from Dunkirk era films and stuff. Again, it's all about that anti-gas measures. Helmets, still the Mark II,
Yep.
similar in design to the Mark I, different liner, different chin strap, slightly different design. Moving from Dunkirk, returning back to England, we see training, 1941, 1942, 1943, all prepping for going back into Fortress Europe. We see the introduction of the austerity measures on the battle dress, change of webbing colour because it's all about camouflage. We see helmet nets introduced in 1941, and it's all about more camouflage measures. Notice the respirator was moved away from the chest, less threat of gas. Moving on to D-Day, this is a very whistle-stop tour. Moving on to D-Day, this is an original assault jerkin.
Oh wow.
44 dated. It was designed to enable the wearer to move with more freedom of movement. It was designed to be more comfortable and also not rustle as much as a set of equipment because there's not really that many metal parts and so on and so forth. It's actually got greater carrying capacity within the assault jerkin compared to a set of 37 pattern equipment. And also on him we see the Mark III helmet, which is one of the biggest design changes in helmets away from the original 1915 design. On the back of it, I can't exactly turn it around in a minute, but it's got a pack on the back very similar to a haversack, and you've got a space that sits here for soft kit.
Oh right, okay.
Various appendages for it for various items, such as you see the spike bayonet on here. On the back you've got space for the machete as well. So that's very much your D-Day, third div equipment. And then finally moving on to here, we've got our what could have happened if the war had continued into 1946, 1947.
Right, okay.
Because this is the 44 pattern, redesigned 44 pattern equipment from the Lethbridge mission in 1943, 1944, with all those design changes that came in. This stuff was never actually used during the Second World War, because obviously what happened at Nagasaki and Hiroshima with the atomic bombs ended it. It was used in the Malaya, but this is very much what could have been if the war had extended like they thought it would have done. But obviously it came from
That's an interesting one, but it's very American.
There is a lot of American influence within here. And if you look on the belt with the 44 pattern equipment, you can actually hang bits of American equipment off it if you so wished. You can also see there's a lot of design changes here that move forwards to Vietnam. Hats, and it was, all the material was rot proof, it was anti-mosquito, or mosquito, not exactly repellent, but mosquitoes struggled to get through it, and anti-gas, because we thought the Japanese would use chemical weapons against us in the jungle.
Right, okay. That's really interesting though, because this is something you don't get to see.
You don't get to see it very often.
You don't see it very often in books either.
No,
so
you don't.
That's really added to this display that you brought here this weekend.
Yeah, it is interesting to see what could have been.
It is, yeah.
And obviously they redesigned everything like socks, woolly pulleys,
Yeah.
and you've even got insect repellent in there as well, if you see that.
Yeah.
Viewers probably can't see it on here, but yes, it is interesting stuff.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, thanks, Ramsey.
No worries, Pete.
I'll see you later.
You now join us here with Tail End Charlies and Tabs and Taff. Now, Tabs, what have you got on display for us here at Living History UK Festival?
Well, here we've got a little bit of ground crew equipment, so some of the tool bags that they would have been using, and we've got Taff here who's representing a navigator from the Royal Canadian Air Force. And he's wearing the typical kind of kit that he would be going into the bombers with.
Oh, brilliant. Well, shall we have a look at him?
Yeah,
then?
let's take a look. So first of all, we've got the flying suit. This is the standard issue that all of the air crew would have had. And he's just about ready to go on board now. So we're going over water. He's got the Mae West on. We're going at height, so he's got a parachute rig on.
Oh, good.
In his right hand, he's got his parachute ready to clip on as and when he was bailing out, and not before. And also behind that, he's got his navigator's kit. So that's where he's got his compass and his computer. Not as we know them today, but they're still called computers. Yes. Around the back of his head, Type C flying helmet with his oxygen mask, which includes the microphone, and in the helmet we've got the earphones, and so that he can breathe later on, he will plug himself into the aircraft's supply.
Okay.
And this goes into the communications system, so he can be in constant contact with the pilot and the others in the aircraft.
Oh, brilliant! So, what was it like? What was sort of what were the conditions like being a navigator on an aircraft?
Well, considering we're Bomber Command, we're going out at night.
Yep.
So the first thing to note is that it's going to be dark.
Of course.
The aircraft that we're in are very restricted. Not much room to go around the aircraft at all. Hence why the parachute is left off.
Oh.
So the parachute would be near the pilot, the navigator, the observer. And if they were in the situation where they have to bail out, then they would grab the parachute, clip it to the front of the parachute harness and leave the aircraft. On the way down, they would pull the lever and the canopy would go up, tear this part of the harness apart and create the canopy that slows him down to about 8 miles an hour, hopefully, by the time he gets to the floor, which is survivable.
Yes.
Much more survivable than terminal velocity.
Oh, of course. Well, thank you very much, Tabs. Thank you very much, Taff. It's been brilliant talking to you.
Thank you. Enjoy the day.
Thank you.
So we're here at the field kitchen with a very good friend of ours, Chuckles, who has been the mastermind behind the field kitchen. He's kept us provision for the weekend and more than anything kept our spirits up as well. So Chuckles, how has the event been for you?
It's been really good. Nice weather, lots of public interaction, asking questions about the soya stove and army catering of the Second World War, and even a bit further back, a lot of people were asking about catering in the First World War, which is really interesting to put forward what actually happened. And all the guys I've fed so far, the 50 of them, have had nothing but compliments so far. So,
well, the food has been absolutely exceptional, mate, I have to say. And no, as a personal thank you from me, cheers ever so much, mate,
right.
Because without you doing this, I think the guys would probably have starved to death. Although the local chippy would have made a lot of money. But
yes,
on a serious note, thank you very much, mate, because the food has been, as always, top rate, first class.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The other element to the Oxen Books display was that of soldiers on home service during late 1940, training and liaising with the newly formed Home Guard units. Such as the Oxfordshire Home Guard, there were another group who attended the festival, and are, in my opinion, one of the premier Home Guard groups on the circuit in the UK. They have broken firmly away from the whole Dad's Army stigma, and really put the bravery and sense of duty of the original Home Guard on the map. Seen here as a member of the Oxen Books Living History Society, and as well as depicting a day-to-day life of a soldier and working in the field kitchen, the group's main impression is that of a soldier during the Battle of France in 1940. Armed with the SMLE and clothed in a new battle dress serge uniform and 37 patterned web equipment. On his chest is the Mark V respirator haversack, and rolled up on top of his haversack is the gas cape. Worn on his upper right arm is a gas detection brassard. These are frequently seen early war, but they do occasionally pop up late war as well. As we leave the Oxen Books Living History Society display and the Oxfordshire Home Guard, we venture down to the Arborfield barn and we see what the late World War II display has in store for us.
I'm joined by Matt Moore from PBI, which is Poor Bloody Infantry, and we're in their display. So, Matt, what are you displaying here at the festival?
Right, well, you've stepped into the end of the end of the Second World War. This is 1945. You're surrounded by the signals office of the 6th Airborne Division as they landed during Operation Varsity, which is the crossing of the Rhine, the first time the British soldier entered Germany. And what you can see is the radios that they would have taken with them.
Oh, brilliant.
I like to think of it as the iPhone 1944 edition. No text messaging available, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's just interesting to see how technology has advanced.
It does, yeah. So what sort of equipment have we got? So obviously these are radios.
Yeah.
But obviously various different styles.
Yeah, the various different types for different purposes. You've got at the very bottom of the range here. This is the world's first walkie-talkie, a handy-talkie. We actually borrowed them from the Americans. Very simple in the American style, on and off. Turn it on with the aerial. The range of that is just about further than you could shout.
Right.
So not a lot of use
great,
for longer range stuff, but useful in battle. Then next on the range we've got the 18 and 68 sets. Very similar looking sets, but one's crystal controlled. They work on different frequencies. Man packable, about a 6 to 8 mile range on those. And then the next level up, the 22 sets, they found first use in the Battle of Arnhem. They were not brilliant sets, but the idea was that they were supposed to be man transportable and parachute droppable.
Right.
They did have a lot of trouble with communication with the rest of the forces further down the line, mainly because they rely on the big aerials, and it's not an easy thing to put up a 140-foot aerial in a housing estate with someone shooting at you.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So they are sometimes unfairly criticised.
Yeah.
And then right on the other end we've got the 76 set, which is again a crystal controlled set. That's the longest range set we have, the 300-mile range. The BBC took those along, so the war correspondents were able to feed back to England their reports from the day, and they sometimes got pressed into use with the airborne forces themselves as well.
And I can see you've got the Mark 1 Pidgey.
Yes, this is
at the end.
When we've run out of food, this is the last resort. Yeah, the speckled Jim in there. This is the last resort of messaging. In a converted biscuit tin, which is what they were. They were converted from standard biscuit tins.
I never knew that. I thought they actually had their own proper container. I never knew it was a biscuit tin.
You can see the lid on the top there is because they were delivered sealed.
Yeah.
So obviously he's going to have to breathe.
Yeah.
So you have to remember to undo the lid before you transport him, or he'll end up being dinner.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, thanks for giving up your time, mate.
No problem. Thank you.
Poor Bloody Infantry's display worked in unison with another premier living history group, Les Parachutists, who specialise in portraying the SAS during the latter half of World War II. Pete caught up with group leader Dickie Bass.
So we've now moved into the World War II section of the festival, where I'm joined by Richard from Les Parachutists, who portray the SAS in North West Europe in World War II. So Rich, what were the SAS doing in North West Europe?
Well, essentially, Pete, they're fresh from a fight in 1943. And while they were out in Sicily and Italy, they were used and misused in more of a commando role. So they were used en masse, large-scale raiding forces, attacking garrisons on the coastline. And as you and I know, this is not the protocol for the SAS. They were raised as pretty much the first British Army guerrilla band. So by the time 1944 happened, they were taken under the wing of the Army Air Corps, which is where their maroon berets came from. They changed from sand to maroon. And then they started progressive operations with the Maquis. So they were dropped to various places around the Morvan region of France, and much more central. And the idea of this was they were to hamper the enemy, cut communications, blow up railway lines, and essentially be a bit of a nuisance, stopping the Germans from rising further up towards the beachhead. And obviously the more operations they do, the more Germans they have to leave back to fight the Maquis and tolerate the SAS, if you will, and that drew the men away from the battlefield at the beaches.
Oh, brilliant. So go through with what you're actually wearing, because this is very different to what you're going to find in either a conventional airborne unit or even an infantry unit, because they are pretty much doing their own thing, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, the thing of it is, people seem to think that the SAS were a bit of a ragbag band of, vagabonds, and they just wore anything they could find, but it's not so much anything they can find, but anything that worked for them. Right. And quite often you'll find that guys did have a bit of a uniform, and there's things everyone adapted. They didn't just find them. For example, I'm wearing the US M3 knife in the M8 scabbard. Now, the SAS decided that although all the commandos and the airborne were using the Fairbairn and Sykes fighting knife, that was purely a killing machine, and they actually wanted something practical. Practical, that they could open a can of beans with, and that's pretty much what they adopted. So it's the same with the US 1911, the Colt 1911. Now, once again, these became standard issue for the SAS. It wasn't who could get one. These were carried by all troopers. Every trooper would carry a personal sidearm. And they liked these because they were a good, reliable weapon and they had stopping power.
Yeah.
Other than that, the standard battle dress that you would have seen on parachute troops, trousers parachutists with the expanded leg pocket, all the other bells and whistles. Our boots, commando boots with the SV sole, the rubber sole, for extra more grip and
Very practical.
Very practical indeed. Obviously, I'm wearing a German captured jacket. Now, on Operation Archway, which is what we're portraying this weekend, Jeep operations had moved on from more vans, so the SAS role then became much more frontline than behind the enemy lines. So they were moving around in armoured Jeeps, and obviously they had a lot more access to things that they could use and utilise. So you see a lot of guys wearing US Jeep coats, DR coats, dispatch riders coats, anything that can keep them warm and dry in April 1945, which is going to be quite inclement in Germany. And one of the major things they found, which they really liked, was these German jackets. And this is a case of finding them where you can, because obviously they were knocking over German stores and God knows what. But they found this to be a nice, warm, padded jacket, pockets and a hood. And that's why you'll see quite a lot of operations on Archway photos with these guys wearing those. Finally, the US folding stock carbine. Once again, they utilised these heavily in France, and they continue to use them. Well, even as late as Malaya, the SS were using M1 carbines because they're a good, reliable weapon once again. 15 round mag, so you've got a few rounds there. You can lay down a bit of automatic fire and get out of it.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Rick.
You're very welcome.
We were really impressed with PBI's and Les Para's display. The amount of authentic equipment and knowledge was arguably second to none, and to top it off, Pete was even treated to a guided tour of an SAS Jeep, set up as it would have looked in 1945.
So I'm joined by Dean now, and he's going to talk us through the SAS Jeep.
Sure. So this is SAS Jeep that's been done up with the armour plate. This particular is more set around sort of late war, so you're talking from about January to sort of May 45. The configuration you've got here is with the Browning 50 cal, which was fairly common. It was either the Browning 50 cal or the twin Vickers. This particular way this is set up is exactly for Operation Archway. So it's a lot of subtle details, but particularly for Archway, you see a lot of them with the convoy number.
Is that in chalk here?
Yeah, so the convoy number was chalked on for the simple reason, as the SS were punching through the lines that joined certain convoys, and just to save confusion for marshalling, you have the numbers written normally on the side. You also see it sometimes written on the compo boxes at the front, which is quite a nice thing. For us, obviously, doing research, etc., it's quite easy then to start dating and start putting the correct Jeeps, because otherwise it's just a picture of a massive Jeep. So it's quite easy then to start looking at the little subtleties and make sure that we get the right look for the right operation, which can be, as you can imagine, going through pictures yourself, it can be quite hard to try and tie down what's right for what operation. This particular Jeep, in this configuration with the armour, it's got one or two things. So if we just start at the front, it's got strengthening bars just here, which are kind of synonymous with the SAS Jeeps. It's something that came in later on after the Western Desert, but again synonymous with the SAS Jeeps in Northwest Europe. The cutout grille, again synonymous with the SAS Jeeps. Around this sort of period though, you do see them where they haven't got, they did also put armour inside the grille. But that's something that came sort of around this period, but again it's not common in every single one, but it is quite prevalent. You'll also notice there's the armoured cable there. That was actually what they used from when they were actually dropping these Jeeps in. Now the armoured Jeeps weren't dropped, they were driven in. But again it was something that they kind of kept hold of, because again a lot of these Jeeps were refitted, so they were dropped, refitted with the armour. So you see quite a lot of that, so it's quite a nice little detail that you see. The one in the Airborne Forces Museum is actually that's actually there for parachute drop, has actually got one of those cables, so you can actually see what it looked like prior to we used it for towing. You start seeing as well at this time of again this sort of period where they're using a lot of captured German insignia, etc. So sometimes you see them with some pendants attached to the front. In this instance, we've got a German mine thing again, just to put two fingers, I think, on it. Also, any sort of equipment, etc., strapped to the front. A general airborne mod, so cut down bumper there. Sort of moving back, this is something that's quite specialist to the SAS Jeep, something that came in a bit later on. What they did was they put a strengthener underneath the bonnet because of the weight that's going to be on it. for all the wheels, etc. But then also what they did was take off the bonnet catchers.
Oh,
the idea
yeah.
was that you would unscrew the bonnet here.
Yeah.
Obviously with the armour you can't lift it up properly.
Yeah.
So what you do is you take those two off,
Yeah.
and you could actually lift the bonnet completely off, which allowed easy access to the workings of the Jeep. Sort of moving back a bit more, you've got the two long-range tanks.
Yep.
These were retrofitted. Again, there's nice sort of differences. So they actually use the cutouts from the grille to protect the actual pipework that's on the floor. And what they did as well was they actually used the stop clock, which was actually off the Brengon carriers. So they're fitted at the back. And there was one fitted behind the passenger seat, and then one fitted in the central column, so that the driver or the passenger could flick between the two. Apparently they had mixed issues, because obviously you're driving around with a hell of a lot of fuel on board. Sadly, in one of the first operations they went out, the Belgian SAS, their officer got killed by an incendiary round with hitch and took it out. But again, for research purposes, it starts making it a little easier to sort of work out which are which, because again, we didn't necessarily all drive around with nice badges on, so it makes it easier to start picking out operations. And then the bustle rack at the back. Again, synonymous this time. Prior to this, they were actually strapping the Bergens to the back, which is obviously not practical.
No.
So you'd have the bustle rack fitted. You'll notice also there's a lack of armour at the back. This is something that you started to see less of, and the reason being is because of the pure weight. So on the back you'd have your man either with a Brengon or a twin Vickers, plus all your man's weight, plus all your kit, plus all your fuel. You know, I mean, these things were heavily laden. Put them under,
especially about that. You've got all that ammo as well.
Exactly, and anybody who's driven in a Jeep or even drives a Jeep will know that the back end can easily go. So it was kind of discarded quite sooner.
Leaving the World War II groups behind, the next group that we visited on our travels was Assegai Rhodesia, who were portraying the 1st Royal Rhodesian Regiment during the Nyasaland emergency.
You now join us with Assegai Rhodesia. This weekend they have been portraying troops of the 1st Royal Rhodesia Regiment during operations during the Nyasaland emergency. Here we see Rifleman Teron. He's dressed as a rifleman during the Nyasaland emergency, how they'd look. He's wearing an AirTech shirt, so perfect for the Central African climate, nice and lightweight. He wears jungle green cotton drill trousers. On his top here, there's 37 pattern web equipment. This is the same web equipment as what his father would have worn during the Second World War. In one of his pouches, in this pouch, he'll have 2 Bren gun magazines, and in this one, he will have a 50-round cotton bandolier. In his hand, we have the number 4 rifle. Again, the same rifle as what his father would have been using during the Second World War. He has on his hip the number 9 bayonet, which he will now show us. As opposed to the earlier style bayonet used during the Second World War, this one is shaped like a blade, and this was believed to be a much more soldierly and militant appearance for what was supposed to be peacetime soldiering. During riot situations, tear smoke would be used, and that is why the men are still equipped with smallpox respirators. Again, this would be of wartime vintage. The reason why a lot of the older equipment was being used is because, as more or less backwaters of the empire, all the good stuff was still being used in Britain, Canada, Australia, etc. And so the more modern equipment was slow to trickle down. The only example really of the most up-to-date equipment being used would be the Mark IV steel helmet, painted in its iconic bronze green.
Completing our journey of the British soldier of the past 200 plus years, a C Company Operation Herrick and Tellick display team.
We are here with Danny Rees and his incredible group, C Company. Danny, talk us through what C Company are representing this weekend.
Cheers, Dom. C Company are the Operation Herrick and Tellick display team. We cover the recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. The question I always ask people is, where were you when 9/11 happened? And I've never had somebody, other than the people who were born after the incident, not know when they got that dreadful news about the Twin Towers and Pentagon in New York. And it's been a catalyst, I believe, since 2001 of most of the world's problems since. Obviously, 2001, after the Twin Towers, the first people in the American Special Forces. We had the CIA already in country, but the ODA teams were the first ones in ground. Within 3 weeks of the Twin Towers, American Special Forces were on the ground themselves in Afghanistan. A month after that, our own SBS and SAS were on the ground also. So it's quite incredible, really, that within a month and a bit, we had some of the world's best special forces already in country, starting the fight back. Made popular by the film 12 Strong.
Of course. And so, so you have the special forces going there first. Then what sort of came up? What was the build-up of the main body of the Allied forces going in after then?
Well, the main build-up really was the standardisation of the camps. For example, we had, especially in Afghanistan, it's my own personal knowledge base, we had Kandahar airfield. Bastion was starting to be built. We already had the legacy airfield up at Bagram up in the north, and also the Kabul. We also had some smaller plots like Lashnagar, Garakesh, were all smaller bases around the country. But fortifying those areas and moving out into the countryside in the FOBs and the fire bases and working from there. So that build-up happened over the next few years, but the main pushes into Helmand were around 2004, 2005.
Okay, so with that background, what have you got on display for us today?
Well, we covered here basically a timeline from 2001 up until the parts of when the countries were starting to stabilise themselves. So on the far right here, we have some mannequins showing the standard kit and equipment of one of the American Special Forces, the ODA teams were wearing, including their weapons and equipment. In the cabinet, which we'll do some shots of later, we have some bits and bobs showing that obviously the terrible situation happened with the Twin Towers, and very, very rarely, we actually have some artefacts that were recovered from ground zero of the Twin Towers. So that's quite a poignant thing to look at and just take a moment to think of what happened on that terrible day. Moving along, our centre table is showing the development of kit and equipment. When troops first went into Afghanistan and later Iraq in 2003, the kit was quite substandard. It was kit from we'd used in the first Gulf War and kit that had been basically brought out of storage. But instance in Afghanistan and Iraq realised that our kit needed to be brought up to date. Urgent operational protocols and procedures were brought into place. Body armour was brought in that covered the whole of the front rather than just a small section, which most squadrons will know is the chocky block armour, little tiny piece that covered just the heart. Went to massive off-spray plates that covered the full front and the full back, but also it covered things like the legs, the arms and the groin for full body protection. A lot of that kit was taken off because when you're working in 50-odd degree heat, the last thing you want is extra weight. So the kits were stripped down just into waistcoat sections. Also, things, for example, medical equipment was changed. When the war first started, a lot of the bandages would have been recognisable to soldiers from the 70s and 80s. But things like the tourniquet was brought back in. By the mid-2000s, near enough every soldier was taught how to apply and use a tourniquet in its information. The Israeli bandage, now every squadron will know what an Israeli bandage is. But the fantastic thing about it, compared to the bandage of World War II, this is a compressor bandage. It has a lock-off system and a built-in tourniquet using the clip. So, compared to how it was back in the original first field dressings of World War II vintage, that is a serious medical upgrade. Mine detection also. Afghanistan is one of the most mined countries in the world. If you consider the fact that the Soviets were there in the 70s and 80s and they'd left tens of thousands of mines, legacy mines there. Also, these mines were dug up and used by insurgent forces and replanted, trigger devices added. Mine detection and mine equipment was improved. We had Valen, the mine detector kits. Also, personal mine detector kits were issued. Again, British forces, American forces started really stepping their game up.
Well, brilliant. And can you tell us a bit about the weaponry you've got on display as well?
Yeah, well, moving along from our good old standard British SA-80, I know a lot of people hate it, but I love it. It's a good bit of kit. And the L96 sniper rifle. We're quite lucky today. We have a good selection of weapons and equipment as used by the Iraqi army and the Afghan forces, but also the insurgency. Again, the same kit and equipment was used, reapplied in different ways. We have a good old standard AK-47. This is an Afghanistan bringback, but it's actually from Albania originally. The second type AK we have here with the folding stock is actually Chinese, but has parts from West Germany and Poland. The RPG is an RPG-7, was actually originally made in Iraq in 1986.
Incredible. Well, thank you very much, Danny, for that rundown of your display and your group.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having us here this weekend.
Thank you. We've now joined here by Danny's guest, Tom, who's going to tell us the operational use of the vehicle you see behind us.
Right, yeah, so I served in the Pathfinders between 1995 until 2012, deployed on operations a couple of times in these vehicles to Iraq during the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and also 2006 to Afghanistan. Subsequent tours we used the Jackal. So 2003 we used these, and it was the first time we'd really used them on operations. We'd been on some other bits and pieces, but that was the first sort of serious deployment. And we operated in packets of 4 vehicles. So in each vehicle you got 3 people, so you got 12 people just going out on their own. So quite small groups really, but we carry quite a bit of firepower. As it is here, we'd have GPMG on the front. On the back we'd normally have a 50 cal. We'd also have a Milan, that's what that tripod is there. So if we come across any armour, then we did have some sort of means of defending ourselves, fighting back, that sort of thing. But when we were operating in Iraq, it was reconnaissance work. So the idea wasn't to go out and take on the enemy, even though we did sometimes. The idea was to gather information, and we were well in front of the friendly forces, the front line of our own troops. So we're moving forward, gathering information, sending that information back. And also we was doing things like striking targets for opportunity. So if we come across a particular defensive position that was going to be in the way of advancing troops, we'd take that out. We'd also bring in airstrikes using the FACs and stuff like that. But the actual vehicles, so the commander would sit here. You've got a weapon there that's mainly just for self-defence. Obviously the driver's there and the gunner's there. You'd have allocated arcs between each vehicles. The front one, obviously the front vehicle, your allocated arc is to take on anything that's going to come in front of you, react to any ambushes, stuff like that. And then the rest of the guys, they're just there to cover their arcs, keep their eyes out for what else is going on around you. The vehicle would be well packed with rations, ammunition, water and fuel. That's the 4 main components to what you're carrying. You've got enough kit in there to operate for at least 2 weeks, I'd say. And during the Iraq war, we were quite often issued with rations that were the same rations for the whole couple of weeks. So not much fun eating the same thing for the same couple of weeks. But great vehicles for working off-road, and yeah, a lot of firepower, but no protection whatsoever. So we didn't have anything whatsoever other than the body armour we was wearing and the helmets we was wearing.
Sure.
Yeah. During Afghanistan then, so we operated again doing reconnaissance roles, but that quickly changed into basically more of an aggressive role and also defensive. So places like Musuem, we were stuck there for 2 months, and the only weapons we had to defend that were the weapons off these vehicles. So things like the 50 cals and GPMGs set up on the defensive points around the perimeter, and that's all we had. We didn't have any sort of mortars or anything like that. We did have 51 mortars, but they're pretty much like pop guns really.
Yeah, sure.
So we didn't have 81 mortars or anything like that. We did have close air support that we brought in quite a bit. So things like A-10s, Harriers, B-1 bombers.
Yeah.
Some mega close air support, and that was awesome to see that stuff. And a mega morale booster for when it did happen. However, we nearly all got killed by a B-1 at one point. So the B-1 dropped a 2,000 pound bomb that landed about 100 metres from our location, and we was all saved by the fact that there was a 10-foot wall around our compound.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that stopped us all from being killed.
Crikey.
In a one. But other than that, the A-10s were fantastic, bringing in really, really close air support onto enemy positions. Out in these vehicles, out in the desert when we weren't stuck in locations like Musuem, basically again operating with no protection whatsoever, and just we fired a lot of different types of weapons off the back of these vehicles, 50 cals, Milans, all that sort of stuff. Luckily, we got out of that with sort of minimum casualties. But yeah, so that was my main experiences of operating out of these vehicles.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
No problem.
Thanks.
Cheers, buddy.
No worries. I'm now joined by Anthony of Charlie Company. Now, Anthony, run down what you're wearing.
I'm wearing the Osprey body armour and the Desert DPM camouflage of UK forces in Afghanistan around the 2010 era. Also have the SA-80 A2 weapon system and the Bowman PRR type radio. and have the other weapons and equipment, ammunition, water, etc. that they would have needed to survive in that environment.
And so this is general of most troops that were operating in Afghanistan in 2010.
That's correct. Many troops who were operating from vehicles in that era.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much, Anthony.
Thank you.
Each day was rounded off with a timeline comprising of one member from each group in date order, starting with the soldier of 1775 and finishing with the soldier of 2015. This was a really visually impactful way of demonstrating exactly what we wanted to bring together for the weekend, in line with our theme of the fighting British soldier of the past 200 years.
What an absolutely fantastic weekend we've had at the Living History UK Festival.
Absolutely, and we've had among the best living historians this country has to offer at this event.
And it wouldn't have been possible without our hosts at the Chiltern Open Air Museum.
So, until next time, keep history alive!
We had a fantastic time at the Living History UK Festival, and whether you visited or attended, we hope you had a fantastic time too. We cannot thank all of you enough for supporting our project to keep history alive, and we have to give a very special mention to these guys, as without them, there would have been no festival. Planning for the 2023 festival is already in progress, and we shall announce more details once we have them via our social media. Please do consider hitting the link in our bio and joining our Patreon and supporting us in our quest to keep history alive.